A peaceful night for Pope Francis, who is said to be resting and responding well to medical care.
The Vatican says he's increased his physical therapy and his condition remains stable.
Breaking news at this hour, the Vatican saying Pope Francis experiencing a sudden worsening of his respiratory condition. The 88-year-old pontiff remains alert and oriented and is cooperating with therapeutic measures.
Pope Francis's health is worse than the Vatican wants the world to know. For weeks, they have tried to calm the public, but those closest to him are finally speaking out. What they are saying is deeply worrying.
Well, Elizabeth, there's no question this is a setback for Pope Francis. He's had a few good days, which the Vatican had described as gradually improving his condition. But now they tell us that early this afternoon, the Pope had basically a coughing fit, which led to vomiting.
Some claim he is preparing for the end. Others say the Church is already making plans for what happens next, while keeping it from the public. Is Pope Francis on his deathbed? What are his closest associates revealing?
Francis is said to be resting this morning after facing new health problems. Doctors say his inflamed lungs continue to give him trouble. Francis used a mask and ventilator overnight to help him breathe.
The first signs of decline. For a long time, people have wondered about Pope Francis's health, but now those closest to him are finally speaking out. The people who consider him a father figure have seen changes that the Vatican isn't openly discussing. Some have described seeing him exhausted after the simplest tasks. Others say he now struggles with things that used to be effortless, like standing for long periods or moving around on his own. It's not just old age slowing him down. His decline has been sudden, and the people around him are worried. At the start of February 2025, things became impossible to ignore. The Pope started missing important events, which was unusual for him. No one expected him to be everywhere all the time, but his absences were becoming more frequent. One of the first red flags was his last-minute cancellation of a scheduled appearance at a Vatican meeting with bishops. The official explanation was mild fatigue.
The health of Pope Francis. The Vatican released a statement today saying the Pope experienced a, quote, sudden worsening when it comes to his respiratory functions. The pontiff has been hospitalized, as you know, for 2 weeks now after being diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs. NBC News International.
But those close to him knew that wasn't the full story. Behind the scenes, he had been struggling with exhaustion for weeks. We have more hidden truths to reveal. Stay tuned. Then came the reports of breathing difficulties. People inside the Vatican noticed that even short walks left him winded. He was leaning on aids more often, sometimes stopping to catch his breath after just a few steps. Those who interacted with him daily saw the difference. He moved slower. His voice, once strong and steady, now sounded weaker at times. Even during simple meetings, he seemed drained. His public appearances became less frequent. When he did show up, he often looked frail. At a general audience in early February, he surprised many by delivering his speech while seated. For a man known for his energy, this was not normal. He had always insisted on standing, even when he wasn't feeling his best. But now, it was clear that standing for too long was too much for him. His team tried to adjust to his condition. Podiums were lowered, speeches were shortened, and schedules were rearranged to allow for more rest. But none of this stopped people from noticing the decline. Then, on February 14th, everything took a turn for the worse. That morning, the Pope was rushed to Rome's Gemelli Hospital. The Vatican initially downplayed the situation, calling it a precautionary measure. But as the hours passed, more details began to emerge. It wasn't just fatigue or a minor issue, it was a severe case of double pneumonia. Both of his lungs were infected, and he was having serious trouble breathing. Doctors immediately started him on oxygen therapy to help him breathe more easily. He was placed under constant monitoring, and medical staff were reportedly on high alert. Initially, there was hope that he would respond well to treatment, but that hope started to fade as his condition worsened. By the evening of February 15th, Vatican officials were holding private meetings to discuss the situation. High-ranking clergy were being briefed regularly, and some of them were visibly shaken. They knew this wasn't just a minor health scare. The Vatican, however, stuck to its usual approach, which is to control the narrative carefully. Their statements were brief and optimistic. The Pope is stable. His condition is improving. He is responding well to treatment. These words were meant to calm the public, but behind the scenes, concern was growing. Reports leaked that his doctors were not as confident as the Vatican statement suggested. While the official updates painted a reassuring picture, people inside the hospital knew the reality was more complicated.
This latest health scare comes more than 2 weeks into the Pope's hospital stay in Rome as he battles double pneumonia. The Vatican says his prognosis today remains very guarded.
Those who had visited him noticed how much he had changed in just a short time. He had always been known for his sharp mind and warm presence, but now he looked tired and weak. Conversations with him were shorter. His voice, once full of life, sounded strained.
May the Lord give you the strength and the healing you need in order to recover.
Now it's our time to return all of your prayers you've given us.
I hope you get better and may your recovery be soon. We offer all of our prayers to you so that you may have a speedy recovery.
Some clergy members who visited him left the hospital looking shaken. They weren't just worried about his immediate recovery, they were starting to ask difficult questions about what would happen if he couldn't return to his duties. Inside the Vatican, discussions were happening behind closed doors. Some officials were beginning to consider long-term scenarios. If the Pope's health continued to decline, what would the next steps be? Would he be able to continue leading the Church? These were questions no one wanted to ask publicly, but they were becoming impossible to avoid. At the same time, people outside the Vatican were growing impatient. The public wanted real answers, not just vague reassurances. Journalists pressed for more details, but Vatican spokespeople stuck to their script. Even as rumors spread about the Pope's worsening condition, the official statements remained unchanged. This situation has left many people uneasy. Those who have followed Pope Francis's leadership over the years know how much he has given to his role. He has always pushed through difficulties, rarely showing weakness. But now, for the first time, it's clear that his body is forcing him to slow down, whether he wants to or not. Don't miss the next part of this video, where things get even more sad. Pope's worsened critical condition. By the end of February, Pope Francis's condition had worsened to a level that even the Vatican couldn't ignore. On February 28th, reports started spreading that he had suffered a serious setback. At first, the details were unclear. The Vatican still tried to downplay the situation, but behind the scenes, doctors were deeply concerned. The Pope was experiencing severe bronchial spasms, making it even harder for him to breathe. Every breath was a struggle. On top of that, there were growing fears that his kidneys were beginning to fail. For an elderly man already fighting double pneumonia, this was dangerous. His body was under extreme stress, and doctors knew they were running out of options. Non-invasive ventilation, which had been helping him breathe, was no longer working as well as before. His oxygen levels kept dropping, and the medical team had to make a difficult decision. Some doctors believed it was time to place him on a ventilator. It would allow his lungs to rest and might give him a better chance of recovery. But Pope Francis refused. He had made it clear that he did not want to be intubated. He did not want to spend his final days unconscious, hooked up to machines. According to sources close to him, he said he wanted to remain lucid. He wanted to be awake and aware, no matter how much he was struggling. This was his choice, and the doctors had to respect it. As news of his worsening condition spread, the world waited for updates. Then, on March 1st, Pope Francis did something unexpected. From his hospital bed, he recorded a short video message for the faithful. His voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but his words were clear. He thanked people for their prayers and support.
And the Pope has released an audio message to thank people for their prayers. The Pope, of course, has been in hospital fighting double pneumonia for almost 3 weeks now. Tonight, the Vatican said,
I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your prayers for my health from the square.
And then he said something that left many shaken. I place my life in God's hands. It was a simple sentence, but it carried a heavy meaning. This was not the message of a man who expected to recover. It sounded like a farewell. The video was released by the Vatican, and the reaction was immediate. The Pope looked unrecognizable. His face was thin, his features sunken. His usual warmth was still there, but his body looked frail. People who had followed his leadership for years were shocked. This was not the strong, determined man they had seen so many times before. This was someone who was preparing for the end. Inside the Vatican, panic was growing. High-ranking cardinals had already been holding private discussions about what would happen if the Pope became too ill to continue. Now, those talks became more urgent. Meetings were held behind closed doors, with some of the most powerful figures in the Church gathering to discuss the future. Officially, Pope Francis was still the head of the Church, and he had made it clear that he would not resign. He had always said that he did not believe in stepping down, even when faced with illness. But now, with his health failing so quickly, decisions had to be made. The Vatican is a place where everything happens carefully and deliberately. Nothing is rushed, and tradition is followed at every step. But in this situation, time was not on their side. If Pope Francis could no longer lead, what would happen next? Would the Church be forced to hold a conclave sooner than expected? Who would take over if the Pope was unable to perform his duties? These were difficult questions, and no one wanted to be the first to say them out loud. But behind the scenes, preparations were already starting. Some reports suggested that senior cardinals had begun drafting plans for what would happen if the Pope became too weak to continue. Even though he refused to resign, there were discussions about how the Church would function in his absence. There were also rumors that some within the Vatican believed he should step down, even if he didn't want to. But this was a complicated issue. The last pope to resign was Benedict XVI, and that decision had already caused controversy. Another resignation so soon would be unprecedented. At the same time, there was the matter of the public. The Catholic Church has over 1 billion followers worldwide, and they were all looking to the Vatican for answers. But the Vatican was saying very little. Their statements remained vague, only acknowledging that the Pope was receiving medical care and thanking people for their prayers. There were no direct answers about how serious his condition really was, but for anyone who saw his last video message, the truth was clear. As the days passed, uncertainty grew. The Pope remained in the hospital, and while some reports suggested small improvements, others said he was still struggling. The Vatican remained tight-lipped, refusing to give any detailed updates. But it was certain that this was a critical moment for the Church. The decisions made in these private meetings would shape its future. And all the while, Pope Francis continued to fight, choosing to face his illness in his own way. The most shocking part is yet to come. Inside the Vatican, the people closest to Pope Francis have started to speak more openly about what is happening. Some of them, despite their efforts to remain strong, have accepted that the situation is beyond human control. Archbishop Georg Genswein who was once the secretary to Pope Benedict XVI, has been by Pope Francis's side throughout this difficult time. He has privately told colleagues that they should start preparing for what is coming. He has spoken about how the Pope has refused aggressive treatments, choosing instead to face his illness with dignity. He believes Pope Francis does not want to prolong his suffering unnecessarily and has decided to place everything in God's hands. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, has also shared his concerns in private. While he has remained focused on handling diplomatic affairs as usual, those who have spoken to him say he is deeply worried. In a conversation that was later leaked, he admitted that no one really knows how much time the Pope has left. He described the Pope's current condition as a daily battle between his body and his will. This has been a painful thing for those close to the Pope to accept, because until recently, he was still pushing himself to carry out his duties. Now, even those who once believed he would recover are beginning to acknowledge that the situation is far more serious than what has been officially stated. Some of the Pope's closest aides have been allowed to visit him in the hospital. These are people who have worked with him for years, those who have been by his side through both his most important decisions and his most difficult moments. It has been reported that the Pope has taken time to give them his blessings, even though speaking has become difficult for him. Those who have been in the room with him say his voice is weak, but he still manages to offer words of comfort to those around him. A nurse who was present during one of these visits later shared that he had whispered something about having done his part and leaving the rest in God's hands. Outside of Rome, bishops and priests around the world have started addressing the situation with their congregations. Some have told their followers to remain hopeful, while others have begun preparing them for the worst. Brazilian Cardinal Odilo Scherer has reminded people that Pope Francis has always spoken openly about the reality of life and death. According to him, the Pope has prepared everyone for this moment in his own way. In Africa, bishops have called for a day of fasting and prayer, seeing this as not just a health crisis, but a spiritual test for the entire Church. The Pope has always had a deep connection with the global Catholic community, and now that connection is being felt stronger than ever. His personal secretary, Father Gonzalo Emilius, has been one of the few people allowed to stay with him every day. He has spoken to Vatican staff about the Pope's state of mind, saying that he seems to be at peace with whatever happens next. He still smiles and prays despite the pain, but those around him can tell that he is ready for whatever comes next. This has been a difficult reality for those who have worked closely with him for years. Many had held on to hope that he would recover, but now they are coming to terms with the fact that he might not return to the Vatican as they had once expected. As the Pope's condition continues to decline, Vatican officials are preparing for an announcement at any moment. In the event of his passing, specific procedures will be followed, starting with the declaration of the sedi vacante period. This is the time when the papal seat is officially empty and preparations begin for the election of a new pope. While no one is openly discussing it yet, cardinals around the world have already begun making arrangements for the next conclave. What are your thoughts on the revelations about the Pope's health? Let us know in the comments section. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Click on the next video displayed on your screen. You will enjoy it.